How's that, Jeff?
It's great,
All
Mike.
right, perfect. I would like to call this morning's meeting of the Rutherford County Planning Commission to order. And Mr. Vaught, would you mind leading us all in the pledge and the prayer, sir?
You bow your heads. Most gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for allowing us to come together to conduct the business of this county. We ask that you see us with wisdom, help guide us to do the right thing for the county. We ask that you be with our leaders in our county, our state, and our nation. Be with us as we go through the coming week. Help us to help those that cannot help themselves and help those that have had difficulties over the last week with the weather. In Christ's name we pray, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Ms. Gale, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Rhonda Allen, Jim Aberwater, Veronica Buchanan.
Here.
Will Jordan.
Here.
Mike Cush.
Here.
Greg Lynch.
Here.
Chip Pinion.
Here.
Charlotte P.
Here.
Steve Sandlin. Mike Vaught.
Here.
Jeff Phillips.
Present.
Thank you.
Quorum.
All right. Our chairman is a little under the weather and a little cracking of the voice, so he's asked me to step in today. But I think he does have enough health to approve the minutes of last meeting.
That don't take much.
Mike, I move that they be approved.
Thank you so much.
Second it.
All right, all in favor of accepting the minutes?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you, minutes accepted. All right, Douglas, it looks like we have a handful of items that have been withdrawn or deferred.
Yes, sir. Just briefly, we have two items under final plat approval, item 7. Those would be items A, the W.R. Thompson final plat, and item D, the Bottoms subdivision. And also the one item we add on here for site plan approval, W.R. Thompson, we are pulling that one from the agenda as well.
All right. Well, that would take us back to 6A then, submitted for preliminary plan approval, Ridgecrest subdivision.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This particular subdivision is located off of Barfield Crescent Road. They're looking at 24 lots, actually I think it's going to be 22 lots. The original submittal was 24, but 22 lots on about 11.5 acres, not quite as much. Again, located off of Barfield Crescent Road. This subdivision was actually approved by the Planning Commission at their August 23rd, 2013 meeting. The applicant has made some changes to the design. If you look on your screens in front of you there, this road originally was going to cut all the way through and then continue down to the south. They've changed that and have decided to cul-de-sac that here, so this will no longer be a through street. That's the biggest change as far as that's concerned. When this was approved, and Mr. Hughes may have some more comments on this, it was approved contingent upon an off-site detention area, a waiver to that provision. So if it's granted today, it would also need to include that provision for the waiver as well. Just a few outstanding items on this plat. There needs to be an updated service letter from CUD as far as water availability and step availability for our file. Again, the waiver for the off-site drainage that we talked about. And also, there is a consent to drain for this since it's on off-site property, and I think, and for this down here as well. But when the final plat comes through, there'll need to be a note on the final plat referencing the document for those. So I'll let Mr. Hughes go into any more detail about the detention if he'd like.
Right. It's essentially what Doug said. It was approved previously with an off-site detention pond that sitting in that north corner, labeled detention pond number 1. And the other easement is for off-site drainage that comes from the west and kind of cuts through the bottom of the subdivision and would then go on back through to Barfield Crescent Road. But we just like to see that they reference the agreement documents on the plat, so it's a firm document.
Are we okay with them cul-de-sac in that street? Because I know this other side's already belongs to developers, and we were probably looking for some connectivity I'm not familiar with what we're doing on what whoever New South Developers is, what they're doing, but, you know, is staff okay with that not being a connection, because that's more ways in and out for emergency, fire, tornado, whatever, you know?
Exactly.
Well, I mean, and it looks like Mr. Reed's here to address some questions as well, but when you look at the master plan, and I'm kind of glancing at it here, on, which would be page 3 of your, of the plan that you have at your desk. Well, actually, I think all I got is the.
Yeah, I think we just
the one
have the
sheet.
front
Yeah, they just
page.
have the one sheet. It shows other connections to some of the subdivisions to the west and also back to Barfield Crescent Road. So I don't think that that's really, I'm not gonna have a whole lot of heartburn about that personally.
Yeah, I'm Jamie Reed with SEC. The developer's actually got some houses already on those large tracts. He's about to start on them, so that would.
Oh, across
That
over on
where
New
that co-
South?
Yes, sir.
So that's not gonna be a subdivision per se, they're
No,
large
sir. He's
tracts.
tracking it off, and I think in 3 5-acre tracts or something like that, and building some.
I just
the
thought
state houses.
if that was a true subdivision, it'd be good for them to connect, but if
Oh yeah.
that answers that, thank you.
Any more discussions or comments?
Doug, the one we approved last week, and where we incorporated the retention pond into the lot. And I said something about putting up some signs, on each corner where it would mark it and say, you know, this is, can we do that? Can we get them to do that on this, since it is off-site, you didn't want somebody else to buy this tract of land, go in there and go to messing with the, you know, maybe they'll be good for whatever language y'all want, whatever language staff comes up with.
Yes.
To mark.
They
mark
are
those.
proposing that area to be fenced as well.
All right.
So it'll be kind of protected that way too.
Any more comments?
Motion approved.
Motion to approve, second? All right. All in favor of preliminary plan approval for Ridgecrest subdivision, let's say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All right. 6B would be also a preliminary plan approval for Muirwood subdivision, Section 4, 20 lots on 5.5 acres zoned RM. Doug?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As you stated, this property is about 20 lots on 5.5 acres. This is located off of Rucker Lane, to the, right, basically the west of the Murfreesboro city limit. Well, I guess it's between the west and the east. Planning commissioners may recall, some of you I think were here at the time, this originally came in as a planned development. This was actually annexed into the city of Murfreesboro. This is the one that caused the one of the lawsuits the Murfreesboro city is still under at this point. So because of that lawsuit, this area still is within the county's jurisdiction. So this is just another section of the Muirwood development, essentially, is what this is. There are a few items on here that do need to be addressed. Again, the service letters from the providers, even though this is an existing subdivision, we just would like revised ones for the new section. Mike, I'll let you handle most of these. I think are really yours anyway. So,
Like Doug said, we need water, sewer, electric service letters. The construction entrance, they had it coming through Section 1, which was recently paved. We don't want them bringing construction vehicles through the new section, newly paved section of Section 1. There's a break in the sewer line. It doesn't connect. They did add a note saying that the sewer would be connected and coordinated through Murfreesboro Water and Sewer Department, but right now what they're showing, there's not a connection from Section 4 back to Section 2 up into the existing sewer system. So we just need them to coordinate that.
and I guess one other big thing is since this is on city sewer, this will require Murfreesboro City Planning Commission approval as well before anything is done.
When we first approved Muirwood, we had so many houses could be built before the road was improved, and now Veterans Parkway is kind of taking the place of Rucker. We cleaned all that up. I remember we had some discussion about that a year or two ago.
Yeah, there was a meeting. I don't remember the exact date of the meeting, but they came back and had that condition removed
Yeah,
for the 60
I thought
lots.
we had dealt with it.
Yes, sir, we did.
There was a 50 houses or something.
I think it was
number.
60, if I
Yeah,
remember
that
right.
could be
and
built
then-
before the
right,
road was in.
right.
Doug, let me ask you, based on the needs that you and Mike need in terms of letters and guarantees, are we a little premature on approval, or are we okay with
I think this one, I'm a little more comfortable with this one. This is an existing subdivision, it's just a new section of the subdivision. So we know the availability more than likely is there, it's just we'd like the updated letters for our files.
Okay.
That's really the big thing.
All right.
If this was a brand-new subdivision, and we've run into that with some others in the past, where they didn't have that information coming in, that they haven't even been brought to your consideration because of that.
All right. So if we were to approve this morning, then the next stop is the city, the approval for the city?
If they haven't, I don't believe they've already done that, but they would have to.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And quite frankly, if you could, any approval could be subject to staff comments like we ask normally.
Yeah.
That'd take all this into account. And
Just Manley Thweet, Huddleston Steel Engineering, just a matter of clarification, it has been approved by the Murfreesboro Planning
It has
Commission.
gone up,
okay.
Yeah, it is, is last week, I think. or-
All right. Excellent. Thank you, Manley. Let's open for discussion.
I make a motion to approve, subject to all staff comments.
I'll second it.
All right, Veronica, thank you. All right, all in favor of approval, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimous. All right, thank you all. All right. Item number 7, let's go to 7B, which would be the Waldron Crossing, Section 3, Phase 2, 13 lots, zoned RM.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. This property, as you stated, is the Waldron Crossing, a new section, Section 3, Phase 2. This is 13 lots and a little over 5.5 acres. This property is located off of Lebanon Pike. This plat does appear to be consistent with the approved preliminary plat. The original plan actually showed another lot, lot 26 right here. That lot has been removed due to some, I think it was a comment CUD had regarding water service on this property. So that lot has been removed. So there's actually one less lot than what's reflected on your agenda materials. These went out before that had come back. But as far as any real comments, they've pretty much addressed everything that we've had. So this plat's in pretty good order. So we'll be happy to answer any questions at this point.
Any discussion?
Motion approved.
We have a motion to approve. Would need a second? All right, all in favor of Waldron Crossing approval, let's say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, moving on to Compton Heights, 5 lots on 5 acres, zoned RM, located along Compton Road, and Sam Anderson is the applicant. Douglas?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As you stated, this property is located along Compton Road. They are proposing to take an existing tract and split it into 5 separate lots. We had a number of comments on this particular plat, but the vast majority of them have been addressed. There's really just a couple of things, and I'm going to zoom in on this just a little bit, just to kind of make the point, make it a little easier to see. We've asked them, one of the comments we had was for them to put the lot area and everything on all these lots, which they have done. However, if you look, because of the shading, you see they've kind of what I would call haloed these particular lots here in the information so they're easier to read. They did not do that on this for whatever reason, so we just asked them to go ahead and do that just for clarity's sake, to make it a little easier to read. This was just something, I don't necessarily know if, I'll go ahead and mention it, but this really was more, I just thought it'd make more sense. He's showing the setback diagram over here, and then he's showing some of the setbacks right here. I just said, why not just move that over here, kind of free up a little bit of room. I mean, that's not anything I'd hold up approval for. That was just one of the comments that we had on that. Other than that, most of the comments that we had, I think, have been addressed. And
Just
like,
some minor housekeeping.
Right.
Changing the note number and hatching the different soil type patterns.
But as far as layout of the lots, septic sites, all that stuff, you're good with all that? It's
Yes,
all
sir. Yes,
just
sir.
paperwork, basically.
Right. I mean, these are things that.
Just minor.
Minor things, how, like Mike said, housekeeping, really.
Discussion?
Make a motion to approve, subject to staff comments.
Thank you, Chip.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is seconded. Let's, all those in favor of accepting Compton Heights, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Jumping down to section 8, which actually has been withdrawn. So now we're all ready to staff comment and other business.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just a couple of items under other business, the first of which is to continue our discussion on some zoning ordinance amendments for what we're calling retreats. We've discussed this at a couple meetings now. You'll recall we brought this forward originally at our last day meeting. However, there wasn't just a whole lot of discussion at that time just because we had a pretty lengthy agenda and we were just kind of introducing it. We brought it to the Planning Commission's night meeting 2 weeks ago where there was a good deal more discussion about it, a very good discussion, frankly, on that. And staff has made a number of changes to this to try to address some of the comments that the Planning Commission had. You've got a copy on your tables. You'll notice that anything that's bold is something we've added. Struck through, anything struck through, you'll notice the things that we've removed. I've also got it on your screens here so we can kind of go through. It might be a little easier just on the screen. So we'll just go ahead and try to move forward with this. And if you've got questions, obviously, throughout this, just please don't hesitate to ask. You'll recall one of the big things we talked about was, are we creating kind of a backdoor way for other type events and things like that to be approved that we weren't really intending. I know Mr. Vaught and several others had some comments about that. So what we tried to do was beef up the definition just a little bit, not so much about what it included, but what it didn't include. So what you'll see here is the following activities specifically not included in this definition: anything with a temporary use permit, like would be any kind of an outdoor performance, seasonal attraction, those kind of things. Any uses classified as transient accommodations, this would include hotels, motels, campgrounds, those kind of things. Those fall under a whole different classification than what we're proposing here. And then anything we would classify as entertainment and amusement services, either indoor or outdoor. You know, last year we had some amendments come forward regarding what is considered entertainment amusement services. We kind of broke it down to indoor versus outdoor for some of those larger things like radio-controlled airfields, like RC tracks, those kind of things, motocross, something like that. So we wanted to make sure that, for whatever reason, that wasn't going to happen. We wanted to make sure and call that out specifically. Under number 1, we didn't change this a whole lot. I did add expected number of events per year because we had the expected number of attendees, so I just went ahead and added that on there, just really more for consistency than anything else. There was also a lot of discussion on the acreage. We went... based on the discussion, it seemed that the Planning Commission was in favor of lowering the acreage from 10 acres. So we went ahead and made it from a minimum acreage of 10 down to 5 acres, consistent what I thought with what we had heard at the Planning Commission. The next thing about parcels having an unobstructed frontage didn't really change any. Site plan approval would be required. We did make some changes here. The maximum floor area for all uses in connection shall be no greater than, what we changed it to is 5% of the total lot area. That's actually consistent with the regulation we have for detached accessory structures in our residential areas. The reason we did that, because looking at 20,000 square feet for 10 acres, I think we were more comfortable with. However, if you take 20,000 square feet on 5 acres, that might be a little larger than what we really intended. So we thought we'd make it more of a sliding scale as well. You know, if you've got smaller land available for you, you can have less area, but if you have 100, 200 acres, you'd be allowed a little more flexibility in that with a sliding scale percentage like that. The accessory uses, again, didn't change. Another issue that had come up was, you know, are we changing, by changing this, are we creating some kind of a situation where they can use this as basically a hotel, motel type facility, or like you said, a year-long campground? So what we did here was added some language in here saying overnight accommodations shall be accessory to the primary use of the property proposed as a retreat and shall not be open to the general public as a standalone use. With that, we also limited the length of stay from 14 days down to 7, consistent with the comments we heard at the Planning Commission, and we added per singular event. I think that was some other discussion that we heard where we didn't want someone just being able to come in, you know, any time of the year and just use it for a campground, really. So I think that that takes care of that. The uses approved in this section shall abide by the parking requirements. That hasn't changed any. This we deleted, and I'll get into that in a minute why. This really becomes kind of superfluous here as we go along. You'll see why here in just a minute. The rest of this section didn't really change much. One of the other things we talked about were existing buildings on the property and how they fall into all this. At the time, what we discussed was, and I still feel that this is the best way to handle this, in those situations where there may be some existing buildings on the property that want to be used in that manner, if they're within the setbacks that are required of this section, I think it'd be best at that point to just ask for a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals, because some of these buildings may be closer to the property lines. If they're agricultural structures originally, especially, that becomes an issue because they're not regulated setbacks, bulk, anything. So some of them could be pretty much right on the property line. And if that's the case, if they're too close to the property line, that brings into building codes issues as well, as far as you know, firewall separation, those kind of things. There are issues if it gets within so many feet of the property line. I want to say it's 3 feet, but I could be wrong about that. But I still think that's the best way to handle that, but I wanted to make it more explicit than it was. So we've actually added that verbiage in here that if there is an existing building that they want to use, that may require a variance if it's within those setback requirements. Any regulations enforced through other agencies would still have to be met. We took this section out right here, all parking activities, and we're replacing it with this following section. This was probably the one that really generated the most discussion, other than the size of the lots, was really the setbacks. Setbacks for building activities associated with the retreat shall abide by the following setbacks. What we've done is made a sliding scale. If they're providing a type 1 buffer, which is our least dense buffer, they would still have to provide 100 feet. If they are going to go up to a type 2, we reduce that to 75 feet. And if they're providing a type 3, then they could go down to 50 feet. And they can use existing plantings as part of their landscape plan. So if you've got, let's say, 50 acres of land and it's heavily treed and they're wanting to use an area on the property and they more than meet these setbacks, then they'd be able to go down to a 50-foot setback, just making sure that those plantings were maintained. And we'd want to see that on a landscape plan. We thought this was preferable rather than on a case-by-case, just really to avoid any kind of arbitrariness on the board's part, BZA, as they consider these. We thought this would be a little, something a little more, okay, if you're going to provide this type of buffer, you can go down in your setbacks. So that's how we've addressed that. We explain just a little more. Existing plantings can be shown on the site plan. Credits for existing planting shall be determined using section 1104, which is the landscaping section of the ordinance. Also, parking areas would be allowed within the required setbacks, but not within required buffer yards. Depending on the type of buffer that they're using, they may have they would probably have, like if they're using some solid visual screens or something like that, they may not have to have quite as much as these. So they'd be able to get the setbacks. These are just the setbacks. They could park within them, but they just won't be able to park within whatever the required buffer area is, which is normal for site plans. So that gives them a little more flexibility as far as providing design of the site. This is something we talked about as well. Just contact information for the owner or manager shall be provided to the contact person for each event and posted on the premises, just to avoid a situation that we received a phone call about where a neighbor of one of these facilities, someone came and knocked on their door just to find out if they knew how to get a hold of the people. Of course they didn't, but you know, that would avoid that particular situation. The parking requirements, again, we haven't changed that, and this is why we eliminated this particular one here, the BZA having the ability to condition approval upon adequate landscape screen. Of course, we took that out just because of this. It became superfluous. But we also said that they would have the authority to limit hours off operation, number of events, expected attendees, et cetera, on a case-by-case basis. So I think we've addressed the comments that we heard at the last Planning Commission meeting, but we wanted to bring this back for your consideration and to see if you had any other comments, if you're comfortable with this, if you still want us to massage it a little bit. So staff is open for any comments that you may have on that.
What's your expectation, Doug, as far as the number of these things coming before the Planning Commission?
Well, these won't come to the planning commission. If these regulations are approved, they'll go to the BZA. Now, eventually, the site plan will come before you, I guess, if that's what you're referring to. But it's difficult to say. Right now, I know there's a couple out there, and we've received some calls about, and they're just kind of waiting to see how this all plays out. Excuse me. But you know, I can't say you'll see like a half a dozen a year. I know that we're seeing more and more of these type of uses coming in. We're getting a lot more phone calls about them. I would anticipate seeing a couple a year, but it just depends. If that trend continues, we may see more than that.
Okay. Any way you can follow up like this time next year with your the business plan that you present and the performance of the prior year? Could you update us on how this thing went?
Yes, sir.
Since it's
Absolutely.
Kinda new, and let us know what kind of problems you ran into.
Yes, sir. We can
Any.
certainly do that.
I have a question about at the last point. The Board of Zoning Appeals has the authority to limit hours, operation, and number of events, expected attendees. Is that usually their responsibility? I mean, that seems like a lot of power that they have.
Well, they've got the Board of Zoning Appeals. What they're asking, what they would have to ask for here, applicants would have to ask for what's called a special exception to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which is essentially a special use permit. The board has the authority to place reasonable conditions upon special exception approval. Now, you know, that there can be a little bit of discussion as to what's reasonable in people's minds. But if they're saying, well, we want to have 10 a month, let's just say, I'm just throwing out a number, and they're near a residential area, and, you know, several people may comment, well, you know, 10 may be too many, but we'd be okay with 7 or something like that. They may say, well, how about you live with 7? And something they have done before is, you know, establish a track record. If you do well with what we're giving you, you can come back and ask for an amendment to that, and then maybe we'll up it some. So they do have the ability to put conditions on, yes.
So that's the usual their usual responsibility.
Well, on something like this, we're decided to give them that authority, but they have the authority to, let me say that, generally I wouldn't recommend either the Planning Commission, the Board of Commissioners really get involved in hours of operation and things like that. But since they're asking for a special exception, which is something they're just not normally allowed to have by right, you know, I think the board has a responsibility at that point to look at how it fits into the surrounding area and just say, okay, yes, because of these conditions or these situations, yes, you do need to kind of be a little more wary of your hours or the number of events at that point, and we're going to place some restrictions on you. So they're reasonable. They just can't say, okay, well, you have to be closed by 5:00 p.m. every day. You know, for this type of event, that might be unreasonable, you know, so I would recommend something like that. But I think that goes back to the discussion we had. You know, in some areas, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock may be perfectly fine. In some areas close to residential areas, especially if you're going to have a lot of noise. Now, they still have to abide by the performance standards that we have in the ordinance. But, you know, closer to neighborhoods, you know, maybe 9, 10 o'clock is a little more reasonable for something like that. It just, again, it's more on a case-by-case basis.
I have a piece of property that been thinking about this for years, and I was going to have everybody out from the planning commission, and I was going to have it staked off 50, 75, 100, show amount of acreage, feed all of you lunch, but this has been the most miserable 2 weeks. It was impossible to do that. It was, and for us to have just sort of a learning session to just see what 50 looks like, what a buffer looks like, what all of it looks like. Some of the questions that I had that popped up to me, the expected number of events per year. Well, I'll be going into it, or anybody else, for profit. So expected number, if there's, say, wedding, I'm thinking more of like wedding chapel. I'd want one a weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cut me to 24, I don't know that we have a right to put expected number of events in there. It's a for-profit business. If I ran a Walgreens, you could only come in 6 months out of the year. That's out. That's what I would be in the business for. Proposed lighting and sound amplification. If I come into you to do this, instead of me telling you what my lighting is going to be, what my sound amplification will be, do you have a list telling me what I can do instead of me telling you?
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as the lighting and the sound, I mean, the performance standards in the zoning would tell you what you can and can't do.
Well, there would be a list.
Yeah,
of
there.
somebody
I mean,
to know.
it's in the ordinance. I mean, I could flip to a certain page and say, these are your sound limits, these are your lighting limits. You know, I could do that. Now, the expected number of events per year. I mean, what this is, on number one here, what this is what we expect to see on the application when it's brought in to us. Because we want to know, and the board's going to want to know, well, how many events are you expecting per year? How many attendees do you expect? I mean, this is just information for them to know so they know how to proceed as far as evaluating the application, how we would proceed with evaluating the application. That's really what this is for. This is not trying to necessarily say we're setting limits necessarily. Now, if, like, again, we talked last time, you know, it's one thing if they say, well, we're probably going to have 15 a year. Let's just say that, just throw it out there for discussion. And let's just say, you know, of course, I'm not going to be out there counting, but let's just say they end up having 16 or 17. Anybody going to notice? Probably not. If they say we're only going to have 10, 15 a year and they end up having 100, that's a little bit, you know, beyond, I think, what they had said they were going to do. If things got better, I mean, that's great. You know, if they're having a good business, I think that's great. But the board would be evaluating the application on what the expected impact would be on what they're proposing. If that impact goes up, then I think they would have to amend their permit at that point.
It's a lot of gray area in this. It's sort of like regulating smoke. If I'm just gonna have small weddings, and when Jim brought up, and I didn't even think about this, people coming out there and being allowed to do bonfires and big bands and stuff, that never entered my mind. So it's hard for me to regulate one thing and not regulate the other. The size of the 5% right here. Well, say I was going to build a two-story cabin, okay, 2,500 square feet, and I had an old barn that I was just going to fix up for them to take pictures in, and then I'm going to build a little wedding chapel, and then maybe I'm going to build a little pavilion out of where there's a little cedar grove out here, so if they want to use it for summertime weddings, they would have that. And then I want to build maybe a concrete slab for them. Maybe they want to have for dancing after the wedding. Well, we're talking about floor space here. Is a concrete slab? Is that, Mike? Is that floor space? It's just a concrete slab, but we're talking about.
I think that's building structure.
Roofed.
It's got to be a structure with a roof. With the roof. Well, I may have exceeded the 10,000. I have. So with our sliding scale, I would need 6, 7, 8 more acres. We got a sliding scale on it, right? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, whatever that equals. I think 5% of 10 acres would be about 20,000 square feet. So yeah. I mean, I guess it just depends on how big everything it is you're wanting to build.
Okay.
I mean, 10,000 square feet is quite a bit of.
You get something built up
Quite a
that
bit of
much, having
space.
52 events a year, it might all not be in somebody's neighborhood.
Or be rezoned.
Yeah, it might be something that's a full-blown commercial activity right there.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
somebody-
what we're talking rural retreats
Yeah.
and rural
Yeah,
property.
Somebody doing something 7, 8, 10 times a year or whatever, but if they're gonna do something every single weekend, that becomes a hindrance on their neighbors, in my opinion, and then something we just need to let them have the right to carte blanche.
Yeah, and to answer your question too about floor area, our definition in the ordinance, and as far as being under roof, that would be correct. The total of the gross horizontal areas of all floors, including usable basements and cellars below the roof and within the outer surface of the main walls of principal or accessory buildings. So that would, I think just a slab, I don't necessarily think that would count as anything.
All right. Overnight accommodation shall be accessory to the primary use of the property proposed as a retreat. What if with that log cabin setting in there is on Verbo, a Gatlinburg type rental, like I have one already, that's I'm booking into next year already and booking into next Christmas already, and it's not a drive-in with a vacancy sign. It's not coming off the highway to stay there. What if does that saying that needs to be the primary use, and then maybe the wedding chapel part be the secondary use?
This is saying that the overnight accommodations are accessory to the wedding use. You know, you couldn't just have the cabin and rent it out and come under this provision based on the way that we've got it worded right now. I think that's separate from what we're talking about.
Okay, so because it would honestly it would be booked more than my thinking than the wedding chapel.
I mean, what you're talking about is almost like a bed and breakfast type facility. Now, I know that there may not be anybody there cooking, but what you're talking about, where I think falls more under transient accommodations, which is a separate category, which we specifically exclude based on how we've worded this. So I don't think that would fall under that.
I have a question that kind of follows up to both Charlotte and Craig's. On this last bullet where it says the Board of Zoning Appeals shall have authority to limit hours of operation, number of events, expected attendees on a case-by-case basis. The first time I read that, I thought it was worded in such a way that you meant every single event was going to come before BZA. And then as we discussed it, I realized what it meant was each applicant.
Application.
Right.
Yes.
But so then that means as an applicant, you're asking me to give you a one-size-fits-all. And like they're saying, if I have multiple uses and different uses, are you just going to want my maximum on each of those? Or because it's not good, because every event may not be the same.
Right, right. And I think that's, and I see what you're saying, but I think what you're accurate that, yeah, when we're asking for this here, probably what we would do, and I guess we could even clarify this somewhat, we would probably say, you know, what would the maximum number of expected events, or even the maximum number of events per year, the maximum number of attendees, because you're right. I mean, if they're building a facility for 300 people, doesn't mean that every single event they're going to have is going to be 300 people.
If I have a wedding
Right.
group versus a church group, it's going to be two entirely different.
You're right. No,
events.
that's a good point, and that is something we could clarify. But yes, I mean, when we counsel an applicant, we would tell them, you know, as big as you think it's ever going to be, make your application for that.
Goal is.
Yeah.
And then on the case by case, you might want to reword that to be applicant.
Okay. For the application itself. Yeah.
Oh, I did have one more question. So if I'm zoned agricultural,
Mhm.
am I excluded from this? Do I fall under
Well,
agritourism?
okay. Well, based on that depends. Based on the laws that have been passed at the state level, agritourism and entertainment, these type of facilities, if they are part of a working farm, you know, we've got a few like that in the county. Not necessarily doing this, but if all the activities that they have, as I read the law, and Josh may want to chime in on this, we've discussed this somewhat, but if the amount of income being made at the property, if the farming income is the primary income, then I think if these are secondary to all that, then I don't think they have to go through this process. I think that falls under the entertainment, as I understand the law. Now, if it's, and I'm going to use a ridiculous example here, let's say somebody has 100 acres of land, they want to open up one of these facilities, and they plant a little garden on the property and say, well, this is agriculture because I've got a garden right here. Where this use, the retreats and everything, would be their primary source of income and not the agricultural activity, I think this would apply. The laws, the rules that we're looking at right now, I think would apply. If it's a farm, a working farm, and your primary income is the farming and this is just secondary, then I think the farming wins out at that point. I think the agricultural.
That include just somebody having hay fields?
I suppose it could. If they make that much money off the hay fields, I suppose it could. As I understand the law, again, and this is only about a year-old law. The changes they made last year.
And then we're having to get into their money? It's like, are they going to have to prove that?
I mean,
No?
well, I think a lot of that comes in where if they're claiming that they're agricultural, I think at that point we want to see, well, we need to know, are you truly an agricultural use? I think that's the only way to know that, personally. And I'm not one, I don't want to start getting into people's finances by any means. But if they're the ones making the claim, saying, these don't apply to me because I'm agricultural, I think they need to, and they have a responsibility to prove to us that that is the case. You know, I don't need, I wouldn't need like just a huge ledger to say this is the amount of income we make off the farm, this is the amount of income we expect to make off of this. You know, if it tips one way, fine. If it tips the other way, then no. I mean, that's
a good rule of thumb there would be if they file a Schedule F, then they would be agricultural.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't file a Schedule F, then they're probably not agricultural.
Mm-hmm.
So you might, I don't know that you want to put that in the regs, but that's a good rule of thumb.
I'm not sure you want to put a money on that. Farmers
Yeah,
make a
that's
lot of money.
Right, and like I said, the intent of these regulations that we have right here are to get the ones, and the ones we've been getting calls about haven't been the ones where people have working farms. It's been people wanting to buy 10, 20, 30 acres of land, either use an existing structure that's on there or build a brand new structure that's there and use it because it's more of a rustic type environment, not because there's a working farm. This is what that's intended to capture, not the legitimate farms that are out there that are using this as kind of an accessory to what they primarily use out there.
I'd like to offer a little insight on this. If you give me, I got a cold. I see quite a few of these, and most of the ones I have, we get a lot of requests for fireworks for weddings and stuff, and the county fire official has to sign off on that for the state fire marshal will approve it. But most of these are setting in wooded areas. They have torn down old barns and reconstructed them and put down concrete through the barns, and they're really, really nice. They have wedding receptions there. They have weddings, and most of this is set up for that. I know I've talked to most of them. They charge like $4,000 per day. These things are really popping up across the county. I think we'll see 4 or 5 a year because of the availability of the having some place to rent a wedding and to have a facility that can have dancing and partying and such as that. But most of the ones I have seen are setting out in a wood area with a gravel parking lot, a gravel drive. Most time they're close to the owner's residence, and it's just really they're set up. They have a lot of them have a barn set up where they can have the reception inside that. Some of them have outdoor settings where they can have a wedding out in the woods or out in an open field and already have permanent seating sitting there. So I foresee 4 or 5 of these coming up, and most people I've talked to where we're called out to where they want to have an event, and I have a form I have to sign for the state fire marshal where they want to have a fireworks display. We'll go out and look and see what all is involved in this, and kind of see where they're having it and what the conditions are as far as dry weather and how close it is to the wooded area. And most of these people I talk to, these places are booked every weekend. I don't foresee a lot of things during the week. I don't foresee people staying there as far as housing. Most of them are just where a family can go in and rent to have an event, a wedding, and that's basically, they're pretty much booked Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But I'm seeing a lot of these, and everybody I've talked to, some of them, that's their primary income. So I just wanted to offer a little insight of what I'm seeing out there.
Larry, do they have, do most of them have fire pits, like for fall of the year, and do you have to go out and improve that?
No, sir, that would be considered a recreational fire in the fire code. As long as it's within 25 foot of a main structure, you can have a bonfire or recreational fire without any kind of burn permit or any kind of permission on that.
During those periods that you do have to call in, though, would they have to call in?
For a burn permit? No, sir. It's just considered a recreational fire. People are standing around it. Most time when you think about a burn permit would be a large brush pile or a major brush pile, but that's considered a recreational fire. And we do go out there and inspect if they want to have fireworks, which that's getting to be a pretty prominent thing. You know, at the end of the wedding, they have a big fireworks display. But I mean, there's several around the county, and I've just, as this popped up, we've gone out and looked at quite a few of them. And if there's one on Floration Road, there's one out off Thompson Road out in Rockville. I mean, they're popping up everywhere. We had a place out on Franklin Highway we're looking at. It's like a guy went out there and built a barn. It's like, 10,000 square foot. Said I was just going to be agricultural. Then when he built it, said, well, I'm going to have weddings out here. Well, it's at a place, a house, 600 people. So he had to have the place sprinkled. And that was I think the cost of that was like $250,000. But he built a massive barn. And I think with that whole idea of putting that in place to start with. So these things are very popular because of the lack of availability to have places where you can have a big wedding and have dancing and adult beverages and things like that.
Have you seen these more in the rural areas, not up against somebody, a subdivision or rural
Yeah, most
areas?
of them are setting out where it's just the barn and the house. You don't see them. I have not seen them out in subdivisions or other housings around. Most time it's surrounded by a lot of woods and just the primary homeowner structure. Yeah, but most of them are very out in the rural area.
Doug, as your applicant, those that have reached out to you, have they been looking at somewhere more where there's residential areas, or their desire to have them out?
The ones that I've talked with, they're similar to what Larry was just saying, more rural. I wouldn't say that they were really backing up the neighborhoods. I can only think of maybe one that I suspect is out there that's fairly close to a residential area, subdivision-wise.
Go back to a little bit what was been asking, define farm. Does farm mean all 600 acres you got, or just that one piece of land you're going to want to do something with?
A lot of that depends on which rig you're looking at. It's, as far as we're concerned, it's anything above 5 acres that's used for agricultural purposes, and then there's further definitions for agriculture. There are different definitions at the state level for agricultural as well. They don't all jive, for lack of a better word. So it's a difficult question to answer.
Doug, I have a question that came to mind on something Will said a second ago. If I come in as an applicant on page 1 and I tell you my expected number of events is every weekend, all 52 weeks, I've got something going on. Does that fall under this document, or is that, like Will suggested, more of a real commercial entity at that point and would fall under a different regulation or zoning?
Well, I mean, I think if you go to the definition and what they're proposing meets the definition as far as it's a facility owned and operated by a non-governmental entity for providing a rural setting for temporary lodging, camping, conferences, those kind of things, with or without compensation, which doesn't fall into the other categories that we're talking about, I think it could fall under these rules.
Okay. So if I'm booked every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, that's approximately 150 events a year. If I put that on my application, you can't deny, you can't limit that. Or more importantly, at the bottom of the page, BZA cannot limit that, can they?
Well, based on the way we've worded this, the BZA could. They would have the authority to limit those kind of the things.
See, that scares me.
On the front end.
I don't know that I would want to trust my livelihood on what the BZA tells me, that because that's a crystal ball. They would look at a crystal ball and say, 50's okay, 60's too many. How do they have the authority to do that?
Another way to approach this, now we've talked about this just briefly, but haven't really done anything with it now, but I'll throw it out there just for consideration. We talked about in Williamson County where they have limited versus regular rural retreats, you know, where I think the big difference there is just overnight accommodations or not. Now, maybe we look at a different level approach, possibly, where if you're going to have X amount of events, you know, I'll just throw some numbers out there just for the sake of argument, kind of like we do for community assembly type uses, church facilities. If you're 0 to so many people, you fall under, I think it's 150, 0 to 150, you fall under small. Anything 150 to 500, you're medium. Anything above 500, you're large. And we've got different, they're allowed in different zones based on that. You know, if it's under 150, you're allowed by right in any zone. If you're 150 to 500, it's special exception in certain zones. If you're above 500, it's not even permitted. You have to rezone the property. Is that something you'd like to look at for this? I mean, if it's going to be 0 to, I'm just going to throw out a number, 25 events a year, you would fall under a rural retreat. If you go under the next level, it might be level 2 rural retreat, level 3, something like that. I mean, that gets a little more complicated at that point, but it's really just based on the number of events.
That still doesn't.
Yeah, the purpose of those levels will do what? Will guide BZA's.
Well, what you could do is say if you're a level 1, let's just say the smallest one, it could be a special exception in each zone. If it's going to be a level 2, maybe you don't allow it in certain zones unless they rezone it. So if they're going to have like you said, 150 events per year, maybe you don't want to see that in a residential zone. Maybe at that point you say you have to be zoned office or something like that, or commercial even, or something to that effect. That's kind of what we do with the community assembly. When you get to the large community assembly, they have to be rezoned to institutional, I believe is what the zone
Doug,
is.
could it be like that also, that from 0 to 150 participants? And then
You
from
could do
100
it by
from
participants
150
too.
To 300
I mean,
participants and
yeah.
all above 300?
You could.
You could just turn this last bullet point around and put some numbers in there, and that, like, say, no more than 25, pick a number, arbitrary number, I know. But a number of events, number of attendees and all, and the BZA have the authority to give relief from that. That would get it looked at. That would be simpler, in my opinion. You know,
You could do that.
put some limits on there, and instead of going up there and they having to, you know, decide what to give you, you can ask them, say, I want to have more, and then the BZA have the authority to loosen it up instead of it being wide open and they're trying to rein it in.
Then they've been operating for a little while. Their neighbors have an expectation and all that, and if everybody's getting along, then yeah, they'll probably get what they need.
Is there a fee for, if I'm an applicant, come in for this, there's a fee?
Yes, sir. It's $300 fee.
$300?
Yes, sir.
So if you broke it down into 3 categories, would those fees change?
No, it would be $300 flat fee. I mean, that's for really any application that comes to the Board of Zoning Appeals, be it special exception or variance, it's $300.
The thing I keep hearing is worried about potentially who it affects.
Yeah.
Out in a rural area somewhere, you know, I can see none of these things coming into play because it's rural. I mean, still something we need to know as far as information, but I can't imagine if somebody is in a rural part of the county, they're up around, which is what I envision most retreats. I don't see many retreats parked in your city center areas and around residential. It's off-site. It's way out somewhere. That's where I've got the issue is regulating that too hard to where it can't function, especially if it has no impact on anybody else but the person living on the property. It's kind of the way I look at it. If I wanted to have 150 events a year and I'm out on 100 acres, ain't nobody within so many miles of me or whatever, and it's not going to have any impact, why can't I?
Mm-hmm. Well, if it's only
I
one
just see it
neighbor.
more. I just see it more in the rural areas than the urbans, and maybe that should be our boundary somehow. But I don't. That would be tough to.
Yeah, how would you define?
That would be tough to do,
yeah.
and I understand that point of it.
Even in rural areas, there usually is a neighbor somewhere.
Yeah,
You might be right across the road, and there's a band over there 150 nights a year that's keeping his cows upset or keeping him awake or whatever. So there's got to be something to balance that out.
But we shouldn't. I just don't want to restrict those people that it is more accessible for them to do some of that than it would be right up against a neighborhood somewhere.
Well, and you can't just arbitrarily set a limit on. That's crazy.
Doug, when something goes before BZA, especially something like this, we were talking about a large tract of land, what homeowners around them are notified?
Property owners within 500 feet. We also put a sign on the property.
Edge of the property, 500 feet of.
Yeah, from like a buffer. Yeah, if you took from the boundary, if you did a 500-foot boundary, around the whole boundary, 500-foot buffer zone, as we would call it. Whoever falls under that would get a notice. Plus, we put our notice in the paper about it, and then also we put a sign on the property. And of course, our agendas are online, so if anybody.
But you mail it to the ones.
Within 500 feet, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And
So
again,
if I'm on the
that's.
backside, if I've got 100 acres and my 100 acres backs up to their 100 acres.
You should get a notice.
I'm going to get a letter.
That's correct.
Okay.
Mhm. Even if your house is not literally 500 feet from their house, if it's like 2,000 feet,
Right,
if your
but the
properties
properties-
touch,
okay.
you should still get a notice.
And then if I was operating for a while, if let's say we set a limit, like you were saying that they could be working for a while and then see how it's going to go, and then they wanted to go above whatever that threshold was, I'm going to come back to BZA
Correct.
with a new application,
That's
or I'm
right.
going to amend my special exception.
Well, it's a new application for it. It's basically it's the same thing, really. You're making a new application to amend your special exception. So
Another $300.
right. So assuming, let's for sake of argument, let's just say that you went there and after discussion, the BZA said no, we want to keep you where you are, which could happen. Then you'd still be able to do what you're doing because they're not revoking what you're allowed to do. They're just saying you can't go above and beyond. Let's say there were complaints and
Am I
something.
opening myself up to them revoking what I'm allowed to do?
No, because that has to be specifically advertised that way. If you're coming back for an amendment, they just can't sit there and say, well, listen to all these people talk. We're just going to tell you just can't do it. You know, there has to be a separate hearing for that, advertised as such.
So then how is that handled if the neighbors do complain? Let's say we get this worked out, whatever the language is, I'm operating, neighbors complain, what's their remedy?
Well, at that point, if there is a complaint made, of course, it would go to our zoning enforcement officials from our building codes office, and of course, we communicate with them regularly, so we would know about it as well. First thing we'd find out is there any merit to the complaint? You know, and through my experience with zoning enforcement, I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with things where people just complain because they don't like the person. So they'll start making up things, and you go out there and you find out what's really going on. It's got nothing at all to do with what the person said was going on. Those don't, I mean, we just say we've looked into it, nothing's going on. If it's a valid complaint, then we'll talk to the owner of the property, who's, you know, the one that's running the facility, and kind of find out, okay, we received this complaint, looks like this is happening, this is what your limits were, you know, how are you going to address this? And at that point, we'll give them the opportunity to come into compliance. They'll say, well, I just need to do this, or A and B, whatever I got to do to take care of it. Now, if they decide they don't want to do it, then the next item there, if they just say, well, you know, I'm not changing it, you know, I'm just going to keep doing it, at that point, we would say, well, then you're going to have to either make an application to amend, or you're just going to have to, we'll revoke your permit. So if they go and say, yes, we want to make an amendment, and then the BZA says, no, we're not going to amend it, you have to continue to work within your parameters. If they continue to not do it, or to not be in compliance with whatever their approval is, at that point, you know, again, we'd look to revoke their permit from the BZA. There'd be, you know, possible court enforcement at that point. So there are avenues. Now, I mean, granted, they're time consuming, but they are there. So.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but this was for those retreats that are not full-time businesses, that were not intended to have one every weekend. This is one that the original intent was those that have it a few times a year. Is that true?
Well,
if they
sort
have
of.
it every weekend, it was supposed to be commercial or something else.
Well, that was
right?
kind of the discussion we had. Now, again, we didn't limit that in here, kind of like the discussion we've had today. Now,
that was the intent of this. We need to make sure that's what it covers.
yes.
How do we
I
do
mean,
that?
based on, I mean, some of the discussion I've heard today, if we're going to limit the number of events per year, I think Will's suggestion about putting something in here, a hard number, if you will, and then let the board decide if somebody asks for relief from that, they could ask for that. Anything above and beyond that would fall under a whole different category, I think. And like they were saying, that maybe at that point it's rezoned at that point. Now, I'd have to kind of go back, look at the ordinance. This is really the first time we've tried to address something like this. So that would probably take a little bit of research into that.
If it was rezoned, would that open up a bigger can of worms, what might be in that particular?
Well, I mean, that's always an issue. If you rezone property, I mean, not only are you rezoning it for that use, if that use sells, or if that property sells, well, it's open to whatever is allowed in that zoning district at that point.
10 years down the road, no telling who owns that building.
Exactly,
and what's
exactly.
there.
Which is why rezoning should be done, you know, with a lot of, you know, understanding if that's how it could work. You know, that's why, you know, we make a recommendation to you what we think, and I mean, I tell people, I've told several people, we had one come in a couple of months ago that wanted to rezone some property. It was adjacent to a neighbor. It was actually part of a neighborhood, and I told them, I told you that I don't think this is a good idea for many reasons, and ultimately it was denied. But there are some properties out there, and I've told applicants this, there are just some properties in the county that just don't have any business being rezoned. And for that reason, you know, because you just don't know what you may be opening yourself up to 5-10 years down the road.
Which means that if we can make this work for a larger scale, we keep better control.
Correct, especially if you keep it at the Board of Zoning Appeals, because they'll be kind of the gatekeepers in a sense.
It's hard to balance between property owners' rights and neighborhood rights, you know, but I always tend to think of the worst, because I see somebody going to do this and they're having 300 cars 3 nights a week, blocking the traffic, you know, everything else, and music playing all hours of day and night.
Is there, Doug, is there fears that we could have. Chip mentioned 600 acres earlier. Somebody's got 600 acres out there, and I want to have 1 or 2 events a year, but they'll be big events, you know, the big weddings on this 600 acres. And somebody comes in and says, I want to do this, and we say, okay, you can do it. You got a lot of acreage, and it's way out in the middle of nowhere. But that one, and they decide not to have 3 events a year, but 1 event a year, and it's huge. And somebody gets married, and all of a sudden you got a weekend of Bonnaroo going on out there. Those are the type of things that folks like me fear, okay? And those are the type of things that I think, even in a rural area, we want to make darn sure that we know what's going on a piece of property. So if we regulate what's going on right now, and I think that's what we're trying to do because it's a growing industry, and we need to have some type of influence as the way that thing is growing. Are we avoiding those type of things? Somebody comes in and says, okay, you know, I cut hay, this is my farm, and I just want to have a couple of events a year, but they could be really big, you know. We could have us a big wedding. And what do we do then? All of a sudden, you know, they have a wedding on Friday morning, but Friday, Saturday, Sunday is all blaring music, and you know that it's just they charge to come in and blah blah blah.
Well, and I know that we've talked about this before, you know, just in general with regulations. It's impossible to regulate for every single contingency that might be out there. You know, I mean, we'd never get anything passed if we tried to do that. Our zoning ordinance would be from here to the roof, you know, trying to regulate anything we could think of, and it would always be changing because new things would come along. I think leaving something like this with the Board of Zoning Appeals discretion, having their ability to regulate based on the regulations in here, I think goes a long way in maybe alleviating some of the concerns that you might have, is because, again, they're kind of the gatekeepers at that point. They're going to see what's coming in before it does. If somebody says, I'm going to have one event and then we're going to have 2 weeks of camping to celebrate the event, is that really what this intended to do? Probably not, you know, especially with the way it's written. You know, we've limited it even more than that. But trying to get this so specific that we could anticipate every single event that may come along, I just don't think is going to happen. Now, what we could do is when we ultimately get something worked out here, it's kind of like what you suggested earlier, you know, after a year, and we don't have to wait that long. I mean, if we start enforcing this and we start seeing something needs to change, I mean, we can bring amendments to you, you know, within 1 or 2 months, and to say, we've realized that this is happening, we didn't intend for this to happen, we want to change this because we don't want to see any more like this coming through. You know, something like that. You know, a glitch, like I would call it a glitch ordinance. It's kind of what we did with the zoning ordinance about 6 months to a year or so after we originally adopted this back in 2013. If you recall, we had a number of amendments that needed to be made just because it looked good on paper, thought it was sounded like a good idea when we thought of it, but when we looked at it, how it actually functioned, it didn't work like we thought. So we can change those kind of things. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's what I'd recommend.
If it
Get
goes to
something
Board
in
of Zoning
place.
Appeals and they say you can have 25 events, and then there's a public outcry that's ridiculous. There's too few events. Does it come back to us to revise that, to the Planning Commission?
When you say, okay, when you say too few events, you mean the applicant would say, I can't.
That applicant and other applicants also.
They're all
will
saying that
add
that's just too few.
Too few.
That would come back to you, yes, for ordinance amendments, kind of like we're doing right now. You know, we would present to you the amendments, why we're presenting them to you, and we would have discussion like we're having right now. And, you know, ultimately you may look at it and say, we like leaving it at 25. I'm sorry if you all don't like it, but we think it's good, we're going to leave it as is. Or you may look at it and say, well, you know, you're right, let's up this to 50. You know, just throwing numbers around.
Doug, to what Craig said and what Will said earlier, if we allow so many a year, could we put it where it's so many days a year, maybe 50 days, which allows a wedding a weekend, essentially. And then, but if someone wanted to do retreats and they were a week long, and they could do 4 7-day retreats, or or 8, and that eats up something in that neighborhood eats up their days. I'm just throwing out ideas here. I'm not sure how you want to word that or anything. I don't want to limit it too much. I don't want to get you don't want to go too hog wild and have, as somebody said, maybe you said earlier, Bonnaroo going on for an entire weekend.
I mean,
Doug, is there any other, you said Williamson County is doing this? I mean,
they've got regulations that they call them rural retreats, and we've looked at several others.
Now, how are they making it
I don't remember either the ones, or the ones that, not either, but several of the ones that we looked at. I don't remember them having specific event or date restrictions. I'd have to look back at that. I just don't recall off the top of my head. I'm pretty certain that Williamson County didn't have anything like that. The other one we looked at.
How's it working? Do you know?
As far as I know, it's working okay. I haven't heard. Now, I do talk to my contemporaries around the state. Actually, I'm going to a conference later this week. I'll see several of them there. But I could ask about that just to see, if they would change something, what would they change as far as that goes. But as far, I'd have to ask more specifically about it. I know I've talked with my counterpart in Williamson County about it a little bit, just because they're having the same issues we're having. But at least they've got something to deal with it. But, they're having the same things, these things popping up all over the place. But to answer your question, Mike, you could do that. I'd like to look into that.
They could mix and match the days, whatever suited their particular business,
I mean, let me look into that. Let me look back through the ordinances we had just to see if any of them did that.
7 straight weeks if they had 50 days.
Yeah, that'd be true.
Yeah. Of course, if somebody owns a farm and they've got a friend whose daughter or son wants to get married, they can have a wedding in their barn all they want, and
right, and
5,000 people come, and that's within their right.
Right, and that's not exactly. That's not what we're trying to regulate. I mean, I realize that happens, and when it comes to families and things like that. Again, we're not trying to get into all that, but like we discussed at the last meeting, it's one thing if you do it for family, then the next weekend it's the family's friends, and then the weekend after that's the friends' friends, and next thing you know, they're cousins and brothers-in-law. Next thing you know, there's
$1,000 a day. I've got
to your point, I know one, and that's exactly it. It started with our daughter. Well, somebody else wanted it, and now they're booked 30 weekends a year, and it's all outdoors.
And then you've got that $250,000 that he was talking about sprinkling, so that $4,000 not that big when you're talking about $250,000.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, the conversations we have with folks that, on the phone or that come to our counter that ask about these things, I think a lot of people, I think how it all begins is a lot of the times folks go to one of these events and they have a good time, they really enjoy themselves, and they think, I could do something like that. I could go ahead and find me a piece of property, or maybe they have one with a nice structure on it, and they want to go ahead and start using it for that kind of a function, and that's when they come to us and start asking what they have to do. And then when we start telling them, well, that has to be built up to code, which means, because if it's just built as a barn, that's not built to any kind of a building code, really. Then you're probably going to have fire code, brought up to the fire code, the building code. The next thing you know, they walk in. I guess we're dream crushers at that point. They walk in, all these grand ideas, and then they leave, and they're all, after talking to me. So.
I like that term, Doug. Dream crusher.
Doug the dream crusher right there.
I guess I've been called worse, so.
Well, we've had really good discussion, and some of the scenarios that were brought forth today even lends to more questions that we have. So where do you think we stand, and how should we?
Well, I think we need to do more research on this. I don't think I'd be ready in 2 weeks to bring something to the night meeting for consideration.
I do think you made good progress with what y'all.
Oh yeah, and I'm enjoying the discussion. I'm glad we're having these questions because it's allowing us, I think, to craft a better ordinance. Because the questions you have about this are the same questions that somebody coming in applying for this for the first time is going to have. Well, what about this? What if I do that? If we've already addressed those concerns and those questions, it becomes a clearer document and more functional, I think. So, this is great discussion.
And to be clear, if I'm already an existing applicant, Am I grandfathered from some of these?
If you're legally established, a couple of those that Larry Farley was talking about earlier, the two that from the ones that I'm thinking they are, those were pre-approved under the older ordinance, older codes. Well, even the one on, I think the one he was talking about on 96, you saw a site plan for that. So those would be grandfathered, yes. The ones that kind of flew under the radar and just started operating one day, maybe a year ago, and nobody knew about it, I don't think they could claim that because they were not legally established.
Okay, very good. All right. If that discussion is complete on retreats, I would like to move to the last item.
Mike, before you go, you're going to come back like at the day meeting next month?
Yes.
You're going to do?
That's our plan. Yes, sir.
Follow up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Last item is the review of the fiscal year 2015 budget. The budget committee was unable to meet last week due to weather, so we're basically discussing the budget.
Yes,
today.
sir. And I'll go just over this very briefly. I appreciate your all's indulgence on everything. Of course, this is our wonderful time of year where we do our budget for the following fiscal year. Our overall numbers, we have gone up. We'll explain why in a little bit. Our current budget year is a little over 700,000, 704,000, some change. Our proposed budget, 794,000, and most of that will come from really just two major items. These first few lines, and you've got a card copy on your tables too. I just thought it might be easier to follow along on the screen. These first few items, county official administrative assistants, supervisor director, secretaries, these are all salary positions. These are all calculated using figures from finance that we get. I'm going to have Mike Hughes here talk in a minute about this particular line item here, assistants. We're proposing to add a new position, but I'll let him explain that in a little bit more detail. We cut down our part-time this fiscal year to $5,000. We've made that basically we made it a part-time as needed position. We feel that position really isn't needed anymore. We haven't really used it since, I guess, October is when the last time we had part-time help, and we really haven't needed it. So we just proposed to eliminate that position. Employee longevity, this is just the longevity the county offers. There's I think it's $25 a year, if I remember right, for employees that have been here at least 3 years. So this number, you can see, went down a little bit. That's because we've had a little bit of turnover with, Eric Hill leaving and Mike Hughes coming on board. $30,000 for the Planning Commission and BZA compensation. As you can see, 2013-14 fiscal year actual is about 26,400. So this should be, and this is 6 months this year. We're on track to meet that, so I'm not too worried about that. I think we can leave that as is. In-service training, we've left that static. These next several are calculated directly out of finance numbers. This is all employee insurance, disability, state retirement, Social Security, all of those. Small increase to the phone service just because, again, we're proposing to add a new person. This alphabet soup you're seeing right here, this is dues and memberships. These are all the professional organizations, either staff or the county is part of. MPO makes up the vast majority of this Metropolitan Planning Organization out of Nashville. They're the ones that handle all the federal money and divvy it up for projects and things, so we have dues paid into that. Our legal notice costs, we're leaving the same. Our agreements, I think this might change just a little bit. We're proposing $11,000, which would cover any increases to our agreements for our copiers, wide format copier, those kind of things. I'll get into that, why that might change here in just a minute. This is kind of maintenance and repair of equipment that doesn't have a maintenance contract. We budget $1,000 in that. Generally don't have to use just a whole lot of it, but it's there in case we need it. Postage, we've left the same. Miscellaneous, business cards, stationery, we don't, we sometimes use it, sometimes not so much, but it's there in case we need it. Ink cartridges, data processing supplies, again, we've left that pretty much the same. Gas for vehicles, we have gone up. We are seeing more activity, therefore we are having to do more inspections, be out in the field more. So we've upped that some. Office supplies, we've left the same. Periodicals, we've left the same. And other supplies and materials, we would like to purchase an AED, automated external defibrillator, for the building. There's not one here in this building, so we just went ahead and budgeted the cost for that. Usually, we usually budget about $800. We've been told it's about $1,500. They get a nice one in a case, and so we just figured, just add that in, just make it a round number, $2,000. That should be more than enough to cover everything. You'll see a pretty large increase here, data processing equipment. We're proposing to add a new office copier and perhaps a new large format plotter. The plotter is what we use for our big maps to collect the map on. Oh, I'm sorry, it was on the wall. I guess we took it down. But large maps that we do plot. When we're going through the zoning ordinance update, I know you saw a lot of those, but we use it for that. Our copier it's been a workhorse. I'll give it that. But the thing's about 8 years old now. I think we're pretty much on first name basis now with our maintenance person that comes out to look at it. I think it's getting to the end of its useful life. Hopefully any new one we get would last longer, just because we're doing a lot more digitally than we used to. Even what the agendas and everything we email, well, we don't even email, we just we put them on the website and you can come and download them at your leisure. So that's been helpful. So we aren't making as many copies as we used to, but we're government, we still create a lot of paper. So when it boils right down to it, we still need a copier. Our wide format plotter, our large format plotter, has been having issues. We've started having, when it prints, it starts printing, what, for lack of a better word, barcode type things on it for some reason, which it shouldn't be doing. And you never know when it's going to do it. It could plot 5-6 maps without a problem. Next thing you know, you get one and it's just, you can't use it. So we're looking at the possibility of replacing that. So that's where a good chunk of this is coming from. But I'll go back to this particular item under the assistance and let Mike discuss that in a little more detail.
Okay. Currently, we only have one construction inspector. And with the growth of the county, we feel it's imperative to have another one added to staff, just for the increase of workload, but also the quality of work too, to have another set of eyes out there for inspection. So we've looked at several counties around. The city of Murfreesboro has 6 inspectors, whereas we only have 1. Eric Hill in Alabama, he has 4 inspectors, and they have less population than we do. So it's something we think we need, is to add another person, another set of eyes out there.
And I'd add to that too, that we used to have 2 inspectors. When the economy took a downturn several years ago, we lost one of them because of the budget crunch. So really all we're asking to do is to go back to where we were, prior to all that.
It'd also be a pretty good learning curve for the new inspector, because Bob's, like the rest of us, not as young as he used to be, bound to retire at some point in time.
A couple of years.
And it'd be good to have somebody up to speed before that happens. And I think it'll take more than one to replace him.
Yes, he's probably doing the job of 2 people now. Yeah.
You covered this with Mayor Burgess.
We meet with him tomorrow. Now, as far as the position's concerned, we have talked with him about that, so this is not going to be a surprise. Okay. But we've had conversations, but we actually sit down with him and Lisa Nolan, our finance director, tomorrow to discuss. So what ends up coming out of that this may not look the same, but if there's any significant changes, we'll let you know.
You want to put a few extra computers in or something for him to take out? Sure. Take something out.
We thought about putting a Suburban in, but we figured that would come. We figured that could cut anyway. So.
You just quit putting it in, right, after so many years?
You're right.
Finally bought a used one, it seems like, for a while.
No, we still have it.
We do plan on using existing vehicles, so we're not going to add another vehicle for the additional inspector.
Any more questions about the budget or line items in the budget?
Yeah, just real quick, and this is the primary document that we're concerned with, but this is our expected revenue. This is such a moving target, it's really hard to say. We've kind of looked at our revenue projections over the last few years to try to come up with some numbers that make sense. I feel pretty confident we'll hit these next fiscal year, the 65 and the 85. I'm not sure about this. This is such a moving target because you just never know what's going to come in. But we have looked at our development tax, and it is on the upswing. So I don't think this is like out of the, it's not like we're getting 500,000 right now. We think we're going to get 2 million next year. Development tax, when you look at the trends, is trending up. So this would follow along with that trend. The other form, this is just a 5-year capital budget. These are things that we foresee needing in the future. So this isn't anything. These 2 things, a copier and a plotter, of course, we talked about. But, you know, depending on the outcome of the traffic shed discussion, and we're having our first conference call, that was actually supposed to have been last week, along with a lot of other things that got canceled because of the weather. But if we were to move forward with something like that, we would anticipate that as a fee. At some point, we'd like to do an update to the comprehensive plan. That'd probably be more of an in-house thing. This is just, I just threw a number on there that I haven't done a whole lot of research into that. And at some point, we'd probably want to do an update to our long-range transportation plan. So there's some, that's just forecast. Again, these numbers would become more firm as time would go on. But that's just an idea to let you know what we're proposing. But that's kind of it.
Doug, the potential traffic shed study of 80,000, is that a different number to the funding that Mayor Burgess found to begin
Yes.
the study?
Yes, this is completely separate from that.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah, we would have to bid this out and do through the whole, the whole process, if we decided to go that route. I don't want someone looking at this and thinking, oh, see, they're already gonna do it because they budgeted the money.
Yeah.
All this is a possible forecast. We figure you put it on there, if you don't need it, you take it off. This is not in this current, the only thing that's in this current year's budget are these two items right here. All this is future, right here.
All right. Do you need a motion to approve this budget to send to discussions tomorrow with?
Just just an endorsement, I think, would be fine.
Okay. Any more discussion? And if not, I would entertain a motion for acceptance of the budget.
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Vaught,
Second.
second by Rhonda. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, budget motion carries.
Thank you, sir. That's all we had, unless you had any.
All right, please note on your calendar that our next scheduled meeting is Monday, March 9th. That is a 6 p.m. meeting at the courthouse. Any other business, old or new?
No, sir.
No? Anyone? Last chance? Meeting is adjourned.